Jasmine versus Caroline, the debate that changed the election in New Mexico. In the arid heart of New Mexico, between the desert surrounding Santa Fe and the cultural vibrancy of Las Cruces, a quiet electoral contest had silently turned into a national battleground. What was supposed to be just another state race, filled with campaign promises and jingles, had become a spectacle charged with social tensions, manipulated narratives, and a visceral clash between two women with opposing worldviews. On one side stood Jasmine Crockett, a 44-year-old lawyer accustomed to courtrooms, facing opponents with steady voice and sharp rhetoric. On the other, Caroline Leavitt, a 27-year-old political strategist molded in the heat of conservative media, with a peculiar talent for destabilizing her opponent with calculated phrases and an unshakable demeanor. It all started with a single line. "She talks like she's always fighting someone," Caroline said, smiling at a rally in Santa Fe, referring to Jasmine. That was all it took for the thin line between political debate and personal attack to shatter. The race soon stopped being about policy and instead became something deeper, an uncomfortable mirror of a divided America where gender, race, and truth had become campaign weapons. As the days passed and debates intensified, New Mexico wasn't just witnessing an election. It was seeing the prelude to an unpredictable collision. What no one yet knew was that, in the end, it wouldn't just be an electoral victory at stake, but the credibility of an entire system. The first televised debate, a minefield of insinuations. The first televised debate between Jasmine Crockett and Caroline Leavitt was anything but predictable. Broadcast in prime time across the state, the stage set in an Albuquerque auditorium became a minefield of insinuations, interruptions, and thinly veiled tension. Jasmine entered with the poise of someone who understood the weight of public responsibility. Speaking directly, backed by data and marked by empathy, she defended inclusive policies with conviction, accessible health care, job training programs for marginalized communities, criminal justice reform. She spoke with the clarity of someone who had lived what she preached. But before the audience could absorb her arguments, Caroline interrupted with a dry remark. "You're always on the attack. That's not leadership, that's instability." From that moment on, the debate stopped being about policy. Caroline, with a calculated gaze and soft voice, began weaving a subtle yet corrosive narrative. She accused Jasmine of being too emotional, of confronting instead of conversing, playing into stereotypes as old as American politics itself. The racial and gendered subtext was impossible to miss. The most infuriating part was watching the audience, and even some journalists treat these remarks as just part of the game, as if questioning the legitimacy of a black woman being assertive and firm was normal in a debate. The spectacle was set. News channels replayed the exact moment Jasmine raised her voice to counter one of Caroline's distortions. The clips circulated under headlines like "Meltdown on State TV" or "Crockett loses cool in decisive debate." No mention of the initial provocation. No analysis of the substance. Just a clip that sold the most. The image of a black woman losing control. As a viewer and citizen, I felt rage. Because it wasn't just unfair, it was dangerous. Caroline wasn't just debating. She was executing a strategy of silencing, of dehumanization. And worst of all, it was working. But Jasmine didn't back down. Even under the veiled attacks, she stood firm. And in that moment, even if part of the audience didn't realize it, something began to shift. Because a woman who resists cannot be ignored for long. The media war, manipulation versus truth. After the impact of the first debate, Caroline Leavitt's campaign doubled down on calculated aggression. Behind the scenes, she met with Daniel Monroe, one of the most influential conservative commentators in the Southwest, known for turning any nuance into scandal. Alongside them was Rachel Kemp, a state representative and recurring figure in Republican rallies, who saw Caroline as an extension of her own political ambition. Together, they formed a media trench. Within a week, videos of Jasmine were edited to amplify a moment of tension, stripping away context and inflating the narrative that she was unstable and a threat to institutional balance. The most absurd was a clip where Jasmine demanded transparency on public contracts being twisted into a supposed attack on civil servants. It was a lie, yet spread like wildfire through online groups and opinion shows. Daniel Monroe repeated lines like, She shouts because she has no arguments, while Rachel Kemp made carefully rehearsed radio appearances, claiming she was concerned about the opposition's tone. It was psychological warfare. On the other side, Jasmine had to respond with strategy and dignity. She knew fighting every lie directly would only feed the cycle. So, she bet on people. She relied on Luis Ortega, a young digital activist with a talent for making authentic content go viral. Luis began posting short campaign behind-the-scenes clips, real testimonials from people impacted by inclusive policies, and unedited footage of Jasmine's speeches. It was truth, unfiltered, touching hearts. Then came Dr. Helena Yu, a political science professor at the University of Santa Fe, whose academic and moral credibility was unquestionable. She published an article dismantling the media narrative criminalizing Jasmine's assertiveness. The piece went viral, reaching not just undecided voters but national outlets. The tension grew. While Caroline tightened the knots of her fabricated narrative, Jasmine activated human and intellectual networks that still believed in decency as a political force. The battle of narratives was on, but not even Caroline knew that by doubling down on manipulation, she was setting the stage for her own mask to slip. The second debate, The Truth Strikes Back. The second debate, this time in Las Cruces, was announced with feverish anticipation. The university auditorium was packed, cameras positioned precisely, the air thick with tension. There was something unspoken, a silent expectation that this night wouldn't end like the last. Jasmine Crockett took the stage with the serenity of someone who had spent days not just preparing, but observing. And she came armed with something no one expected: proof. In the opening minutes, Caroline tried her destabilization tactics again, subtle jabs, questioning Jasmine's emotional maturity, accusing her of victim narratives when discussing racial inequality. More of the same. But when the moderator gave Jasmine the floor, the game changed. Without raising her voice, she pulled out a dossier. On live TV, she exposed documents and screenshots of conversations between Caroline's campaign and paid digital influencers spreading distorted content. She pointed with dates and sources, how videos have been edited and mass distributed by fake accounts traced back to consultants linked to Monroe and Kemp. The auditorium fell into absolute silence. Every word she spoke landed like a hammer strike on the machinery of deception. This isn't just an election being manipulated, Jasmine said. It's the people's trust being sold as a product in dirty digital campaigns. The reaction was immediate. The moderator, visibly stunned, asked for time to verify the documents. Caroline, until then flawless in her composure, momentarily lost control of her expression. She tried to deflect, resorting to vague accusations, calling it political theater. But it was too late. The audience, previously restrained, began applauding at key moments of Jasmine's speech. Truth, when well presented, has a power rhetoric can never match. The broadcast captured all. Caroline's awkward silence, Monroe's nervousness in the crowd, and Jasmine's closing line. They played with my image. Now I play with the truth. That night, something broke, and everyone felt it. The narrative control Caroline had so carefully cultivated began crumbling before the one argument impossible to fight: verifiable reality. The fallout, a campaign unraveled. After the Las Cruces debate, Caroline Leavitt's campaign collapsed in real time. The impact of Jasmine's revelations was immediate and irreversible. The media, once complicit in sensationalism, was forced to backtrack. Newspapers that had run hit pieces on Jasmine now highlighted the evidence, questioning the ethics of Caroline's campaign. The shift in perception was brutal. Daniel Monroe tried damage control, going on air the next day to dismiss the documents as possibly forged, and insinuating Jasmine had allies in the digital underworld. But this time, his rhetoric met resistance. Respected analysts debunked his claims in real time, and hashtags like #DeMonroe trended, demanding his resignation. The credibility he spent years building evaporated in days. Rachel Kemp, sensing disaster, publicly distanced herself. In an evasive interview, she claimed no knowledge of the digital team's actions and condemned all manipulation. The statement was met with skepticism. Behind the scenes, She canceled appearances with Caroline and focused on saving her own image. Political survival instinct, cold and predictable. Meanwhile, Jasmine's videos exposing the disinformation machine went viral with surprising force. But what stood out most was a simple clip. Her standing, eyes locked on the camera, saying, "They lied about me, but not about what I believe, and that they can never erase." The phrase became a rallying cry, transforming Jasmine from a target into a symbol of resistance. Caroline's downfall wasn't abrupt. It was slow, visible, inevitable. Her rallies shrank. Her posts, once widely shared, were flooded with criticism. Even longtime supporters quietly stepped back. The charm of the young strategist had become the aura of cold calculation and public disdain. The narrative control that was her greatest weapon had become her heaviest burden. Jasmine, on the other hand, didn't gloat. She stayed firm, as if knowing that exposing the truth wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of an even greater responsibility. Election night, a victory for truth. On election night, as screens in Santa Fe flashed numbers and projections, what unfolded wasn't just an electoral victory. It was a validation of a journey forged under pressure, resistance, and truth. Jasmine Crockett won by a significant margin, not just surpassing expectations, but redirecting the course of local politics. The packed auditorium where she awaited results erupted when the official confirmation came in. She had won Santa Fe decisively and secured unexpected victories in districts where she'd once been underestimated. It was a clear message. People were tired of fabricated narratives and hungry for authentic representation. On the victory stage, Jasmine appeared dressed simply, her expression firm but her eyes emotional. Her speech wasn't triumphalist. There were no attacks, no vengeance. She spoke about integrity, about how every slander forced her to dig deeper into her own conscience, and how every attack pushed her closer to the truth. She said representing the people wasn't about vanity or personal victory, but a duty, a daily commitment to justice, to the dignity of every citizen forgotten by the gears of power. They try to fit me into a caricature. I chose to become a mirror for those who never had a voice in this state. Tonight, that voice echoed. The crowd responded in unison, with tears, applause, hope. Meanwhile, on the other side of the state, Caroline's campaign headquarters stood in silence. The candidate, who days earlier had been the favorite among opinion makers, didn't appear. No press conference, no speech, just a vague statement, released by her staff, stating that Caroline would take time to reflect on the future and prioritize personal well-being. The absence was more symbolic than any public defeat. There was no defending what had been exposed, no way to compete with the image of a woman who walked through fire and emerged unscathed, not by the force of rhetoric, but by the consistency between her words and her life. The election was over, but the impact of what happened would echo across New Mexico for a long time, and perhaps beyond. A new chapter begins. A few weeks after her victory, Jasmine Crockett was sworn in before a crowd that hadn't just elected her. They had embraced her as a symbol of a different kind of politics. Honest, bold, human. The ceremony was modest, but deeply meaningful. Behind her, the New Mexico flag fluttered in the wind as residents of all ages and backgrounds gathered to witness her inauguration. This wasn't the usual image of local politics, dominated by predictable faces and empty promises. It was at last renewal. In her inauguration speech, Jasmine didn't mention her opponent. She spoke about what brought her here, the conviction that politics must be rooted in people's realities. She named the teachers facing budget cuts, the small farmers strangled by poorly enforced regulations, the young people who didn't see themselves in the halls of power. And in her steady voice, she declared, the truth won here. But it wasn't a victory over a person. It was a victory over a system that had grown too comfortable silencing people. Caroline's retreat and a possible return. Meanwhile, far from the spotlight, Caroline Leavitt withdrew. For weeks, she gave no interviews, made no appearances. Her name vanished from headlines, a stark contrast to the woman who had dominated news cycles just months before. But in that silence, something unexpected began to stir. Those close to her revealed that Caroline had started writing, not a comeback speech, but a book, a personal account. not a strategy, but as a sincere attempt to understand what went wrong and why. The working title leaked to the press caught attention. Between image and reality, according to sources, the book would explore her journey, her decisions, the mistakes made, and most importantly, the consequences of choosing to win at all costs. It wasn't an excuse, but perhaps a reckoning with her own conscience, a sign that, though politically defeated, Caroline didn't intend to hide behind silence forever. No Hollywood ending, just humanity. The story between Jasmine and Caroline didn't have a Hollywood ending. There was no grand reconciliation, no final showdown. But there was something rarer. Transformation. One woman was elevated by her courage. The other, perhaps, began to find redemption in reflection. And so, the clash that set New Mexico ablaze ended the way every good story should, leaving questions, hope, and room for new beginnings. This is how one of the most intense and human campaigns in New Mexico's history came to a close. On one side, a woman who defied stereotypes, manipulation, and a ruthless political machine. On the other, a brilliant strategist who, in her quest to control the narrative, ended up consumed by it. But in the end, perhaps the greatest triumph of the story belongs not to Jasmine or Caroline, but to the truth, the kind that insists on surfacing, no matter how hard some try to bury it. Your turn, if this journey moved you, if it made your throat tighten or had you cheering at the Las Cruces debate turnaround, then this is your moment. Like this video, share it with anyone who still believes politics can be more than cynicism. It can be transformation. And of course, subscribe so you don't miss the next stories we'll tell here. Because believe me, in the backrooms of American politics, there are still secrets, falls, redemptions, and yes, characters who will surprise you. Until next time. And remember, when everyone is shouting, the one who speaks the truth is the one who echoes loudest.